Imagine being told you are not welcome at the most important day of your child's life. A mother who devoted years of her life raising her son was crushed when she was asked not to attend his wedding. But the shocking truth behind this decision will leave you speechless. Let us uncover the real reason this mother was banned from the celebration. It was an ordinary afternoon in New York when Sarah received a phone call that would alter her life forever. At first, she thought it was just another call from her son, James, checking in as he always did. But as soon as she heard his voice, she knew something was wrong. There was an unusual tension in his words, an edge she had never noticed before. Her heart began to race as he asked if she could meet him at a local cafe. Sarah, a woman who had always been there for her children, had never imagined that the conversation would take such a devastating turn. When they sat down together, Sarah could see the strain in his eyes, the weight of what he was about to say pressing down on him. He hesitated for a moment, and then, with a deep sigh, he told her what she could never have prepared for. "Mom, I need to tell you something. It's about my wedding, and I need to ask you not to come." The words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. Her mind raced, trying to process the meaning behind his statement. Not come. This was her son's wedding, a day she had dreamt of for years. She had been planning for months, imagining what it would be like to see him walk down the aisle, to witness him start the next chapter of his life. But now, in a single sentence, everything had crumbled. Her heart began to pound, and her hands trembled as she asked him, "Why? Why wouldn't you want me there?" Sarah's voice cracked, the pain of the moment creeping in as she tried to understand what had happened. James looked down at the table, struggling to find the right words. "Mom, it's complicated. It's not about you. It's about everything that's happened between us over the years. My fiancé doesn't think it's a good idea." The words that followed were a blur as Sarah tried to make sense of it all. James went on to explain that his fiancée, Emma, had reservations about his mother attending the wedding. He didn't go into much detail at first, but it was clear that Sarah's presence was causing tension. Over the years, Emma had expressed concerns about Sarah's involvement in their lives, but Sarah had always brushed it off as typical pre-wedding jitters. She never thought it would lead to something like this. Sarah's mind swirled with questions, confusion, and a deep sense of betrayal. She had always been supportive of James and his relationships, from the early days of his romance with Emma to the moment he had asked for her blessing to marry. What had happened between then and now? What had she done to make Emma feel this way? Was she really that bad of a mother? The weight of his words sank in further as he continued. "I know you've always been there for me, but I need you to understand where I am coming from. Emma wants this day to be perfect, and there are some things about our family that she feels uncomfortable with. She thinks it's best if you don't come." Sarah sat there in stunned silence, fighting back tears. The hurt was overwhelming, not just from the rejection itself, but from the fact that James, her own son, was so deeply caught in the middle of a situation he had created. She had given him everything, her time, her love, her support, and now, the very person who had once called her his biggest supporter was turning his back on her, all because of someone else. For a long time, Sarah couldn't speak. The shock had left her feeling numb, and the tears that threatened to spill were caught in her throat. How could this happen? She had always been there for him, always supported his choices, always been the one who believed in him when no one else did. And now, she was being told to stay away from the one event that should have been the culmination of all those years of love and sacrifice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, Sarah managed to speak. "I never imagined this would happen. You're my son, James. You're my family. I thought we were stronger than this." Her voice quivered with emotion, but she held her head high, trying to keep the hurt from overwhelming her. The conversation ended with no resolution, and Sarah left the cafe feeling more lost than ever. She couldn't understand why this was happening, why the son she had raised with so much care and love was now turning away from her. What had she done wrong? What could she have done differently? These questions lingered in her mind as she walked home, the weight of her son's rejection heavy on her shoulders. That night, Sarah lay awake, tossing and turning, unable to escape the hurt of what had just transpired. It wasn't just about not being invited to the wedding. It was about the years of love, the sacrifices, the moments they had shared, now overshadowed by one painful decision. And as the days passed, she wondered if her relationship with James could ever be the same again. Sarah had always believed that family was everything. She and her son, James, had shared a bond that felt unbreakable. Through the ups and downs of life, she had always been there for him. From the sleepless nights when he was a baby, to the tough teenage years filled with growing pains, to the moment he had graduated from college and begun his adult life. For her, being a mother was not just about providing care and shelter. It was about being his support system, his rock, through every phase of life. However, as Sarah sat in the quiet of her apartment after their conversation, she began to reflect on the years leading up to this moment. Something had shifted, and she couldn't ignore the reality any longer. The pain of James's rejection felt like a deep wound that had been festering for a long time, one that she hadn't fully recognized until it had ruptured all at once. Looking back, Sarah began to question when things had started to change. Was it the day James met Emma? At first, she had welcomed her into the family with open arms, eager to see her son find someone who made him happy. Emma was charming, beautiful, and seemed to fit perfectly into their family dynamic. Sarah often found herself chatting with Emma over coffee, sharing stories about James's childhood, and laughing at how they both loved him in such different ways. Emma was reserved, more private than Sarah, but Sarah had respected that. She never pushed her way into their relationship. After all, it was James's relationship to navigate, not hers. But slowly, over time, Sarah began to notice the subtle shifts. Emma started to distance herself, not only from Sarah, but also from the entire extended family. Sarah thought it was just pre-wedding jitters, the anxiety of organizing such a monumental day. But as the months passed, Sarah felt a growing unease. Emma began to express concerns about how much influence Sarah had in James's life. It wasn't blatant. It was always framed as a conversation or observation. Still, Sarah couldn't help but feel that Emma was drawing a line between them. She was no longer as welcome in their lives as she once was. One day, during a conversation about the wedding plans, Emma casually mentioned that she was worried about boundaries. With Sarah, she didn't elaborate at the time, but Sarah could sense the undertones of something much deeper. Emma had begun to feel that Sarah's involvement in James's life was too much. Was it possible that Sarah had overstepped without realizing it? Had she been too present, too involved in their personal lives? As weeks passed, these subtle cues became more frequent. When Sarah visited James and Emma at their apartment, there was a noticeable tension in the air. Emma's polite smile never quite reached her eyes, and Sarah's attempts to make small talk felt more like intrusions than genuine conversations. James, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over, but Sarah began to feel like a guest in her own son's life. The connection they once shared seemed to be slipping away, and Sarah felt herself on the outside looking in. But the real turning point came during a family gathering. Just months before the wedding, it was a casual dinner with relatives, and Sarah had invited Emma along, hoping that it would be a chance for everyone to bond. But Emma didn't seem to share the same enthusiasm. As the evening progressed, Sarah noticed that Emma had become increasingly distant. At one point, Emma disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Sarah and James alone at the table. When Sarah asked her son what was going on, he hesitated before replying. "Mom, you need to understand. Emma just feels like she needs some space. She's worried about too much interference." The words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. She had always respected Emma's space, never once pushing her to share more than she was comfortable with. Yet here it was, an accusation of interference. She had never imagined that her mere presence in their lives, her genuine love for James, could be perceived as something invasive. From that moment on, the distance between Sarah and Emma grew, and so did the tension between Sarah and James. Their once open communication became strained. James started to pull away more, perhaps out of his own discomfort, caught between his loyalty to Emma and his love for his mother. Sarah felt this growing divide, the rift widening with each passing day. In the quiet of her apartment, Sarah began to confront the uncomfortable truth. Emma had not just been expressing concerns. She had been setting boundaries, and those boundaries had become walls. And now, those walls had led to this shocking request for Sarah to stay away from the wedding. The pain of it all was suffocating. How had they gone from a close-knit family to a fractured one? How had she, as a mother, lost her place in her son's life without even knowing where she had gone wrong? Sarah realized that this wasn't just about a wedding day. It was about years of unspoken tension, unaddressed feelings, and unmet expectations. Emma's discomfort with Sarah's involvement in James's life had been building for a long time, and it had now reached its breaking point. The family rift wasn't just about one event or one decision. It was a culmination of years of change, misunderstanding, and emotional distance that had slowly but surely led to this painful moment. And for Sarah, the hardest part was realizing that, despite all her efforts, she may have been too late in understanding the depth of the rift. As Sarah sat in the quiet of her living room, the weight of the conversation with James lingered in the air. She couldn't help but replay every moment in her mind, trying to understand what had led to the shocking request that she not attend her son's wedding. While her thoughts kept circling back to James, there was one person she kept returning to: Emma, the woman who had become her son's fiancée. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that Emma had played a crucial role in this heart-wrenching decision. But what was it about Emma that had led to this point? Was it simply her own feelings? Or was there something more to the story? From the moment Emma had entered their lives, Sarah had tried to be welcoming. She remembered the early days when James had first introduced Emma to her. Emma was soft-spoken, elegant, and polite. She seemed like a good match for James, someone who shared his values and interests. Sarah had always tried to make Emma feel at home, inviting her to family dinners, offering her advice when needed, and even helping with wedding plans when the time came. But as the months passed, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in Emma's behavior. Changes that, at first, she had brushed off as mere nervousness or pre-wedding stress. It started with little things, like Emma's reluctance to spend time with Sarah alone. Sarah had been used to bonding with her children's significant others over tea or a walk in the park. But with Emma, those moments seemed fewer and farther between. When they did spend time together, there was an undercurrent of tension, an unspoken barrier that made Sarah feel like an outsider in her own family. Emma would smile politely, but never truly engage in the same way that Sarah had seen her engage with James's friends or other family members. Sarah tried to tell herself that Emma was just shy or anxious, but deep down, she knew something was off. Over time, these subtle signs began to build up. Emma's quiet demeanor began to feel like something more than just a personality trait. Sarah started to feel that Emma was creating distance, not just from her, but from the whole family. During family gatherings, Emma would often stay in the background, not participating in conversations as actively as Sarah had expected. She would often give vague answers when asked about their plans or family traditions, deflecting the topic without much elaboration. It wasn't that Emma was being rude, but there was a distinct feeling that she didn't want to be part of the family, at least not in the same way that Sarah had hoped. The real turning point came one evening when Sarah and Emma were alone together, discussing wedding details. Sarah had mentioned that she had always dreamed of certain traditions for James's wedding, and she wanted to know if Emma had any thoughts about including them. Instead of the usual warm response, Emma became visibly uncomfortable. She shifted in her seat, avoiding eye contact, and then replied with a curt, "I am not sure those traditions are relevant for us." The word stung, and Sarah felt a pang of confusion. It wasn't just about the traditions. It was about the underlying message. Emma's rejection of these long-standing family customs felt like a rejection of Sarah's place in James's life. Sarah tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just a moment of stress. But things only escalated from there. Over the following weeks, Emma seemed to increasingly push Sarah out of the loop. When it came to planning the wedding, Emma took control, often leaving Sarah feeling like a bystander in the process. There were decisions being made without consulting her, and when Sarah would offer suggestions, Emma would quickly dismiss them. Sarah couldn't help but feel like she was being sidelined in favor of Emma's vision for the wedding. A vision that didn't include her presence in the way Sarah had always imagined. As the wedding day approached, Sarah became more and more aware of Emma's growing influence on James. She couldn't deny the subtle, yet palpable shift in their relationship. James, who had once confided in her about everything, now seemed distant, as if torn between his loyalty to his mother and his commitment to Emma. Sarah could see how Emma's opinions were shaping his decisions, including the choice to ask Sarah not to attend the wedding. It was clear that Emma's discomfort with Sarah had reached a tipping point, and James, caught in the middle, had made the painful decision to side with his fiancée. What made it even more difficult to understand was that Sarah had never been anything but supportive of Emma. She had welcomed her with open arms, given her space, and always respected her wishes. Yet Emma had managed to build a wall between them, a wall that Sarah had only begun to notice when it was too late. Emma's subtle manipulation of James had created a divide that Sarah couldn't have anticipated. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about control, about Emma asserting her dominance in the relationship and pushing Sarah out of her son's life. In the days that followed their conversation, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what had truly driven Emma to make such a decision. Was it insecurity, jealousy, or was it something deeper? Something Sarah had missed. She thought about how Emma had tried so hard to fit into their family, but in doing so, she had unintentionally driven a wedge between Sarah and James. The question lingered: had Emma been acting out of her own insecurities, or was this a deliberate attempt to cut ties with the woman who had raised James? Ultimately, Sarah knew that Emma's influence had played a pivotal role in this painful decision. But what hurt the most was not just the exclusion from the wedding. It was the realization that her relationship with her son, the very relationship she had spent years building, had been quietly dismantled by the woman he loved. And that, more than anything, was what Sarah could not forgive. The days following Sarah's devastating conversation with James felt like an eternity. She couldn't escape the ache in her chest, the overwhelming weight of the words that had been spoken. "Mom, I need you to understand. Emma doesn't want you there." The rejection was almost unbearable, and Sarah found herself consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. She had spent so many years being the one constant in James's life, loving him unconditionally and supporting him through every stage. To have him, her own flesh and blood, ask her not to attend the most important day of his life was something she couldn't have imagined. Yet, there it was, the painful reality. Her initial reaction was one of shock. She couldn't understand how things had gotten to this point. Had she really been so out of touch with the dynamics of her son's relationship with Emma? Had she been too involved, too eager to offer advice or share memories from his childhood? The guilt crept in quickly, followed by a sense of betrayal. Sarah questioned herself relentlessly. Could I have done something differently? Should I have backed off more? These thoughts tormented her mind as she grappled with the confusion and sadness of being excluded. But as the days passed, Sarah's emotions began to shift. The anger that had initially bubbled beneath the surface began to simmer. Anger toward Emma, yes, but also toward James. She was hurt, deeply hurt, by the fact that he had allowed his fiancée to make a decision like this, one that affected not just their relationship, but the very fabric of their family. How could he let Emma dictate who was allowed to be part of such a significant moment in their lives? Wasn't I the one who had always been there for him? Didn't I deserve a place at his wedding, just as I had always had a place in his life? The more Sarah reflected, the more she realized that she couldn't simply let go of the hurt. Forgiveness wasn't something that came easily. For Sarah, forgiveness had always been something earned, through honesty, understanding, and effort. But now, she felt like she was being asked to forgive, without ever having been given a real explanation. She couldn't just overlook the pain she was feeling. Nor could she ignore the fact that her son had allowed someone else's discomfort to override their relationship. The decision to forgive wasn't just about letting go of the hurt. It was about understanding what this meant for her relationship with James moving forward. If she were to forgive him, would she be simply accepting the situation? Or would it mean that her own feelings and needs were being invalidated? Sarah had always believed in the importance of boundaries in relationships. But now, she was faced with the question of whether or not she had any boundaries left in this one. Could she continue to support James, even if it meant sacrificing a piece of herself in the process? Could she let go of her anger and disappointment without losing the essence of who she was as a mother? As Sarah wrestled with these questions, she began to reflect on the love she had for her son. It was a love that had shaped every decision she made, every sacrifice she had ever made for him. She had always put him first, but now she had to consider whether putting herself first was just as important. The pain of being excluded from his wedding wasn't just about the event itself. It was about what it represented. A shift in their relationship, a subtle but significant distancing that she wasn't sure how to navigate. In the quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts, Sarah began to ask herself whether she truly wanted to move forward in the relationship with James under these new terms. Could she accept the fact that Emma would be the one to shape his future? Or would this new dynamic force a permanent rift between them? It wasn't about forgiving Emma, but rather finding a way to reconcile the growing chasm between Sarah and her son. The wedding had become a symbol of everything that was wrong in their relationship. And as much as Sarah wanted to heal, she knew that she couldn't simply brush aside the hurt that had accumulated over time. Forgiveness, Sarah realized, wasn't a simple answer. It was a long, painful process. She would need to come to terms with the fact that her relationship with James would never be the same. He was no longer the young boy who would run to her for comfort and advice. He was an adult, with his own life, his own choices, and his own partner. And while Sarah could try to forgive him, she couldn't deny that the foundation of their relationship had shifted. The journey toward forgiveness meant more than just letting go of the anger. It meant reclaiming her own identity as a mother, as a woman who had always given everything for her children. It was about deciding whether or not she could continue to love him unconditionally, even if it meant accepting things she couldn't fully understand. And as she sat alone, contemplating the future, Sarah realized that forgiveness wasn't a one-time decision. It was a journey that she would have to walk, step by step, with the hope that one day, she could look back and see a new chapter in her relationship with James, one that allowed for healing, understanding, and perhaps, in time, a reunion built on a foundation of mutual respect and love. But for now, she couldn't give him the forgiveness he sought. Not yet. Not until she found a way to heal herself first. As the weeks passed after the painful conversation with James, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. The weight of his decision had not lifted, and every attempt to move forward only seemed to bring her back to the same place of confusion and heartbreak. She couldn't deny that something fundamental had shifted between them, and no matter how much she wished for things to return to how they once were, Sarah knew deep down that she couldn't go back. The question that haunted her was, what would happen next? What would her relationship with James look like moving forward? And could it ever be repaired? Sarah spent countless hours reflecting on the events that had led to this point, but also on the future. What was her role in his life now? Could she simply accept his choice and move on? Or did she need to make a stand for her own sense of dignity and self-worth? The pain of being excluded from the wedding had left an emotional scar, one that Sarah knew would take time to heal. But there was a nagging voice in the back of her mind telling her that she couldn't simply allow this to be the end. She had always been strong, a woman who had faced adversity with grace and resilience. But this felt different. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. This was her own son, the person she had nurtured and loved, pushing her away, and she wasn't sure if she could accept that without a fight. she considered reaching out to James. After all, he was her son, and despite everything that had transpired, Sarah still loved him deeply. But what would she say? How could she even begin to address the growing chasm between them? The hurt she felt was still raw, and part of her wanted to lash out, to tell him exactly how much pain he had caused. But she knew that doing so would only drive them further apart. She had spent too many years teaching him the value of communication and understanding. And now, it was time for her to follow her own advice. If she wanted any chance of healing their relationship, she would have to approach it with patience and compassion, even if it meant swallowing her pride. Sarah also thought about Emma, the woman who had come into their lives, who had slowly become a central figure in James's world, had undoubtedly played a significant role in the events that led to this painful rift. Yet, as much as Sarah resented her for what had transpired, she knew that blaming Emma wouldn't help. It wasn't just Emma's fault. James had made the decision, and he had chosen to side with her. In many ways, Sarah understood that Emma's feelings of insecurity or discomfort had been a catalyst, but they were not the root cause. The real issue lay in the way that Sarah's relationship with James had evolved. Or, rather, how it had begun to unravel in subtle ways over time. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that forgiveness, if it was to come, would have to be a process. It couldn't be forced, nor could it be rushed. But that didn't mean she was ready to give up on her son. She knew that there was still love between them, even if it was buried beneath a mountain of hurt. She had to decide if she was willing to extend the olive branch, to allow for the possibility of reconciliation, even if it meant taking the first step toward healing, despite her own pain. In the following days, Sarah reached out to James. It wasn't a grand gesture, nor was it an attempt to immediately resolve everything. It was simply a text message, a few words that left the door open for a conversation. "I still love you, James. Whenever you're ready to talk, I am here." The message was brief, but it was a message of hope. It was Sarah's way of saying that, despite everything, she wasn't giving up on their relationship. She wasn't ready to let go of the bond they shared, even if it had been tested in ways she had never imagined. Weeks passed with no response from James. The silence was deafening, and Sarah struggled with the uncertainty of it all. But instead of wallowing in the sadness, she began to focus on herself. She spent time doing things that made her happy, reconnecting with friends, indulging in hobbies she had neglected, and even seeking professional help to work through her feelings. She knew that she couldn't rely on James to fix her own emotional wounds. Her healing had to start from within. And then, one day, Sarah received a message from James. It wasn't a long message, but it was enough. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I am sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I am not sure how to fix this, but I want to try." Those words, simple as they were, sent a wave of relief through Sarah's heart. It wasn't the full reconciliation she had hoped for, but it was a start. They agreed to meet, and when they sat down together, it was clear that things had changed. There was still tension, still so much to work through, but there was also an undeniable connection. James apologized again, and for the first time, he shared his feelings. The pressure he had felt to please Emma, the confusion he had about balancing his relationship with her and with his mother. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation, and it gave Sarah some clarity. The conversation was long and emotional, but by the end of it, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't going to solve everything in one conversation, but for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like there was a path forward. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more difficult conversations ahead, but she knew that their relationship could heal if they both worked at it. The resolution wasn't the one Sarah had hoped for, but it was a beginning. It was a chance for them to rebuild, to understand one another again, and to move forward as a family. And though Sarah still carried the pain of being excluded from her son's wedding, she knew that this moment was just one chapter in their shared story. The future was still unwritten, but it held the promise of healing, forgiveness, and perhaps a more resilient bond than ever before. If you enjoyed this story and want to stay updated with more emotional and heartwarming content. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. 2 Sparkles your support means the world and ensures you won't miss any of our latest stories. Join the journey, and let's grow together, raising Belle.